Welcome to lesson 5.4, rational exponents. Whenever we talk about things that are rational, I always call this fractional, meaning that this is a fractional exponent. No, that's not a word. Yes, I made it up. So when you have a fraction in your exponent, if the denominator is n, then you have the nth root of a. Whatever that denominator is becomes the root. We could write this in radical form like this. Radical form, shockingly enough, has to have a radical, and the root matches whatever the denominator was. If there is an extra number on top instead of a 1, then this is still the nth root of a, but it is raised to the power of m, meaning that instead of just in root a, you're either going to have an exponent of m inside, or you can have it outside. It doesn't actually matter which way you do it. I will say that a lot of times it's easier to do the root first than the extra power because that makes it a smaller number that you're taking to the extra power on the outside. And what we're going to do is two things. We're going to find the value of each expression. This is also known as evaluating. So you might see this in the directions as well. What that means is you want it to be a one answer as a number. There probably won't be any variables left. And then we're going to simplify. Simplifying usually means one of two things. Either your numbers don't work out nicely or you're going to have variables. So as we look along this top row, I have the power, so 36 to the power of 1/2. This is the same thing as the square root of 36, and I do want to see that in your work. And then the square root of 36 is simply 6. Same idea over here, except for now there's a 5 on the bottom, so I have the fifth root of negative 32 to the power of 3. So whatever's on the bottom becomes the root. If it's a square root, you can write the 2 out there, but you don't have to. And then whatever power is on top stays as a power at the end, whether that's inside or outside is kind of up to you. And now we have the fifth root of negative 32. 2 to the fifth power is 32, so this would be negative 2. And then you're going to take that to the power of 3. And negative 2 to the power of 3 would then be negative 8. So that's kind of how that extra power works, is I'm still doing the fifth root of negative 32, but then I'm cubing my answer. Whereas on the next one, there is not an extra power up there, so this is just simply the cube root of 125. And the cube root of 125 is 5, because 5 to the third power is 125. Okay, that makes this next one the square root of 4 to the third power. And this one I'm actually going to show both ways. It doesn't matter which one you pick. It does matter, I guess, if it makes more sense to you one way or the other. So over here, I'm going to do the square root of 4, which is 2, and then I'm going to do the third power. And 2 to the third power, as it was on the second problem, is 8. Or I can do 4 to the third power first. 4 to the third power is 64, and then the square root of 64 is 8. So you get the same answer two ways. The next one is 16 to the power of 3/4. So I'm going to have the fourth root. So if you say the fraction out loud like that, it kind of helps you find which one's the root. And then it has the third power attached to it. The fourth root of 16 is 2, because 2 to the fourth power is 16. And then 2 cubed, same thing as the last one, is 8. You guys are going to see a lot of 2 cubes come up because it makes it a little bit easier to work with some of these numbers. And then we have 27 to the power of 2/3. So we're going to do the cube root of 27 squared. Now, I do not want to square 27 on its own. That's one of the reasons why I said it's usually easier just to wait to do that part last. Because if I do the cube root of 27 first, this is just 3. And we all know that 3 squared is 9. Or at least you should know that one by now. Now let's talk simplifying. So we're going to need to use some of our exponent rules here. Instead of kind of like taking a minute to say them all off to the side, I'm just going to kind of do them all here. There we go, got a little blurry. So I'm going to multiply my numbers out front. 2 times 6 is 12. And then I'm going to have to do a little bit of work because I need to add these two exponents together. So I need to do 1/3 plus 1/2. Now, in order to add exponent or add fractions, you have to have a common denominator. 2 and 3 both happen to go into 6. So I'm going to make them both into sixths by multiplying by the same number on top and bottom. So 1/3 is the same thing as 2/6, and 1/2 is the same thing as 3/6. So now they're both in sixths. 2/6 plus 3/6 is 5/6. And then I am going to change this and write it in radical form. That just means the 12 stays where it's at, and I'm going to have the 6th root of x to the 5th. So only the part that still has a fraction in the exponent needs to change. Hey, if you need more help with adding and subtracting fractions, I will try and share a video that has this on there as well. But I basically multiply by 2 to get this to be 6 on bottom, and 3 to get this to be 6 on bottom. But you have to multiply the top and the bottom of a fraction by the same number. Then I have the next one. And I'm going to take everything in this parentheses to the power of 3. 3 to the power of 3 is 27. That is a regular number, so it gets a regular power. But then I'm going to multiply to the rest of these. So 2/5 times 3. If it helps you to put this as 3 over 1, you can. Because what you really need to do is just multiply the tops and the bottoms. When you are adding, you need a common denominator. When you are multiplying, you do not. So that's going to be 6 over 5. And then for B, 1/2 times 3 is simply 3/2. And then we have to change this into radical form. So this is going to be the 5th root of a to the 6th and the square root of b to the 3rd. So they have to each get their own because one of them is the 5th root and one of them is the square root. So they can't go together since they're different radicals. If they were the same, we could put them all under one. Okay, coming over here, I need a number that I can divide 40 and 32 by. So what I'm going to do is divide them both by, let's see, 2 goes into both of them, but so does 4, and so does 8. Since 8 is the biggest one that goes into both of them, that's what I'm going to divide by. 40 divided by 8 is 5. 32 divided by 8 is 4. And then I need to subtract my exponents this time. So if they're being divided, we are going to subtract the exponents. Here we multiply them. This is sort of like distributing outside of the parentheses. That's why I drew those arcs for you. And this one is like adding. Because even though there's parentheses, there's not a power outside the parentheses, if that helps you keep those straight. So for the x's, we're going to need to do 2 minus 1/3. And that means that I need a common denominator. Since the 2 doesn't have anything, remember that it basically has a 1. And I can multiply that by 3 on top and bottom to make it 6/3 instead of 2. 6/3 minus 1/3 is 5/3. And then this part isn't as hard. 1/2 minus 5/2 is -4/2. And then I'm going to circle the part that I need to put in radical form. This part needs to go in radical form because it has a fraction, but Mrs. McFadden, so does the y. But what's negative 4 divided by 2, guys? Negative 2. So the 5 stays where it's at. The 4 stays where it's at. The y has a power of negative 2. So that means it has to flip to the bottom and become positive. So it has to flip if it's negative. So y squared is on bottom instead of top because it was a negative. And then we've got the cube root of x to the 5th. And I'll talk about that negative rule one more time or a couple more times when we get down to the bottom row. I know that one's kind of difficult. So if you're like, what just happened? Just give it a second. Let me get through a few more, and then you can freak out. All right, this next one is my favorite because this 1/2 power just means you're doing the square root. The square root of 16 is 4. And then when we're doing these exponents, we have to multiply them. Half of 12 is 6. And then the square root of 81 is 9. Half of 20 is 10. And those are two different letters, so we can't combine these exponents because one's an x and one's a y. And there's nothing I can divide both 4 and 9 by. Actually, I'll give you a second. Pause the video here if you need to write down any of those. All right, bottom row. So over here on the left, and I know this is a little harder to see. Hopefully you have your paper copy. All right, we have 2/3 minus 1/2. Again, 2 and 3 both go into 6. So to get 6, I need to multiply this one by 2. To get 6, I need to multiply this one by 3. So I have 4/6 minus 3/6, which is 1/6. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my y's. Subtract these exponents. I have negative 1/4 minus negative 3/4. Hopefully you know that when you subtract a negative, it becomes addition. And negative 1/4 plus 3/4 is 2/4. And then I'm going to change this into radical form. This is going to be the 6th root of x. And 2/4 is the same thing as y to the 1/2 power. So that would just be the square root of y. And then these last three are a little bit easier because there is no 4th root of 5. But see how it's negative? That means we have to do this. Put it on the bottom. 4th root of 5 cubed. So if that negative wasn't there, this would be your answer. But that negative is there, so it has to be on the bottom. That's all it does. A negative exponent just moves things to the bottom. Okay, let's try it one more time, except for instead of a 5, it's a b. This is going to be the square root because there's a 2 on the bottom, and you'll need an extra power of 7. Since it's negative, it goes to the bottom. Square root because of the 2, b to the 7th. Done. Those are your two answers for those. And on this last one, you would do the same thing, except for this one is the 4th root. And 16 actually has a 4th root. It's 2, so this would just be 1/2. One quick thing before we end notes for today is none of these answers are negative, but they had a negative exponent. The negative exponent doesn't make the answer negative, it makes it go to the bottom.